Hi, I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Gaver, Presbyterian minister of 3 congregations in Eastern Ontario, and thank you for joining us for our Bible study on the book of Revelation. This week, we're going to start on Revelation chapter 6. This chapter is a fantastic chapter. We've got the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in the early part, and the day of the Lord in the last part. And we're actually going to spend 1 week on each topic. So this week, we're going to be looking at the 4 horsemen. So thank you. Join us, get your Bible out, get your computer and Google, be ready, and turn it over to the PowerPoints. So in this chapter, we have the scroll, and there's 7 seals. And when we open the first 4 seals, each seal is going to be calling upon a horse. It's going to do something or be something. So, a couple of points. Translations do matter because they affect how we interpret the story. You'll see in, for example, in chapter 6, verse 1, in the NIV, it translates it as come. And in the New King James Version, it says come and see. So what's the difference? And I want you to think about that as we go along, because this phrase shows up in verses 1, 3, 5, and 7. What is the impact? The voice is saying it. Who is the voice talking to? Okay, and what does that tell us at the end? So here are the 2 versions again. I heard one of the 4 living creatures call out, as with a voice of thunder, come. Or, I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying, with a voice like thunder, come and see. In the second translation, the New King James, the creature is saying it. Not calling, not shouting, saying it. Come and see. He's probably talking to the one who's writing it down, John, who's having this vision. He's saying, John, come and see what's happening. Look, there's a horse, there's another horse. In the NIV and other translations, that voice is calling the horse. It's calling it out. Come, your turn. So who is being addressed and how are they being addressed varies. That will impact how we interpret the passage. But what else does that tell us? If we're not scholars in the original Greek, and I mean scholars, not just that we can translate it, but we understand the nuances and shifts and extended meanings, we have to be very, very careful about how we interpret it. And maybe even be aware there could be a play going on. Maybe, depending on, and I don't know the Greek that as well as I should, but maybe both are being suggested in this passage. And so it depends on your frame of mind of which way you're going to interpret it. It definitely reminds us to be careful about interpretations and let them be fluid and flow a little bit. So this is a simple chart that you can do. Each color of the horse. What is the rider holding in their hands or somehow is accompanying them? And what is their mission, if you can figure it out, because it's certainly not clear with all of them. I'll give you some time, and when you're ready, just continue. So this is what I put down. The first horse is the white horse. He's holding a bow. You've got a victor's crown. So that means in many people, it symbolizes victory in war. He's competed or something, and he's victorious. He's conquered. The red horse is with a sword. So there's a big battle, lots of bloodshed. Peace disappears from the earth. And that can be civil war, has been one of the interpretations. Black, scales, economic uncertainty, unrest. The pale horse with death and plague, 25% are killed with sword, famine, pestilence, and wild animals. Notice again, there's an asterisk by pale. That color will vary depending on translation. And I want to go back just a second here. Okay. So I'm going to stop the share for a second. Let's say that every culture basically has the same colors. The colors are, different waves and whatever in wavelengths. And we know we've got red and green and I'm trying to think. Well, here's a purple, okay? And we can see these are three very different colors. And it doesn't matter where you live in the world, that's what you're going to see. I know I have some other pens here, but I can't see them at the moment. Well, here's a blue top, okay. For us, we categorize colors in one way, but other cultures can categorize colors in a different way. So for us, we can see red and purple has a bit of red in it. Purple also has blue in it. So we see, purple is a combination of red and blue. These are two very distinct colors. Here's two shades of green. Actually, I even have a third shade of green, okay? They're very similar, but we categorize these are all green. Other cultures might categorize them differently. So this is more of a shiny, reflective green. It's sort of see-through. You might even say it's a hot green. Here's a shiny, reflective red. Some cultures might identify these as the same color, and this is a different color because it's not shiny or reflective. So hot pink and hot blue are the same color because they're both hot. But for us, we categorize them differently. And that is what is happening with the Greek word for pale. We know the word has chloros in it, so like chlorophyll, which is green. But it's sort of a paley, sickly kind of color. Is it really a pale green, or is it more pale with greenish, yellowish? And that's where you start getting again into debates. Another warning about translations and the problems or the challenges when you take images from one culture and transpose them to another is sometimes there's some twists that go on in there. So back to our study. The horsemen have been interpreted in different ways. So just to give you a very rough interpretation, you might see the one horse as being Christ. Jesus is riding that white horse. He's got a victor's crown, and it sort of builds on the imagery that we've seen in other parts of Revelation. Some interpretations will see Jesus or Christ, because he's now the king more than a human, and he's actually riding each of the horses and coming to do different things in the world. So that's one interpretation. Others can see it's a future interpretation. So John is living in the 1st century AD. He's had this great vision. He's writing it down, building on imagery that he knows and is familiar with, but it's really pointing to, for example, what's happening today in the 21st century. So it's prophetic. It's telling you the future of what's going to happen at the end of the world. For the preterist, it means it's already happened. John is taking what's happened, and you can trace different parts. The Parthians were famous for being bold men, and they challenged and defeated Rome in a battle around when John's writing. So you've got that victor's crown. You've got sort of the bloodiness of war, as civil war, even as the Roman Empire is being challenged. In 68, 69 AD, they went through like 4 emperors in 1 year. So you have this uncertainty going on. You had that economic collapse under Domitian, and you've got plagues coming into play also. So John is writing what's happening in his time period. It's already happened, but he's putting it within this cosmic frame of interpretation as showing that it's God's judgment coming or being played out in the world. But it's very much rooted in his day. You have a historicist that can sort of plays with both interpretations, all right? So they see a lot of happening within John's time period, but also spanning the past and spanning the future. And in part, that's because John is using imagery from the Old Testament that did refer very specifically to other empires. For instance, the Persian, the Babylonian empires, the Roman Greek, the Roman empires. And so it's spanning time from the past through the future. And it's very hard to be very specific that this animal represents this event in history, and Revelation doesn't work that way. But the historicist can sort of play where it's in the past, but it's also warning us about the future. So it can span all of history, it can span just that first century, it can span towards the future. And all of these have been, the chapter, the 4 Horsemen, has been interpreted in so many different ways across time. You also have, and I put it in brackets, the evangelical interpretation. And why it's in brackets, it is an event, there is an evangelical interpretation. I just don't know if this is mainstream evangelical or if this is what certain evangelical churches believed at certain points in time. But they would identify it with specific groups. So you had like capitalism, communism, the green was Islam. Now, when I was growing up, the green had nothing to do with Islam. That was never one of the 4 horsemen. So this is this sort of modern evangelical twisting of scripture, because it is sort of twisting. It's trying to limit it very much to this time and age. I just don't know if this is one of the core beliefs of the evangelical churches. And you also have astrological interpretations. Mercury, Venus, all this kind of stuff going on in the sky. And there's good reason for assuming that. The problem I have with this kind of interpretation is, yes, the Jews had astrology, but did it resemble what we understand astrology to be, which is based on the Greek-Roman model? Was it based on the Persian model? Was it based on, who knows, their own that had ties to no one else, or the Indian model, the Chinese model? There's so many different astrological systems out there. Even if John is writing about this vision in astrological terms, do we understand enough about the astrology he was operating from to be able to interpret it? I don't know. But you'll see people trying to tie these descriptions to key dates, key events in John's time and even in the present. So knowing that, I thought it might be fun or worthwhile Googling and seeing how the horsemen have played out in history or in art, in music, literature, movies. And so feel free to do that and jot some things down. I looked at sort of art and history and what are they capturing? What are these images? Where are they similar? Where do they differ? Which ones speak to you? And it's sort of fun to do that. I picked two images pretty well at random because they, well, one, they both spoke to me, and two, there's a big difference between them. So what do they have similar? You've got the white horse in both, and the red and the black. This one is more green, this one is more pale. So they differ a bit there. It's chaos around them. You know, what they're bringing with them is destruction. Here, the chaos, you've got angels around them. The lamb, Jesus, is up here, the lamb that's been sacrificed, and a lot of destruction on the world. So the four horsemen bring destruction. What are the differences? Here, they come all at once. They're basically side by side. Here, if they're following one after the other, it's like there's a chain effect. So that's one of the things that's different. And then what speaks to you, I don't know. I really like the idea of the lamb being above the whole thing. It's like my understanding of this battle between God's armies and the devil's armies. And when God shows up, there is no contest. The devil doesn't compare to God. So Jesus, because this is a symbol of Jesus being somehow above all this chaos going on. I like that imagery a lot. Here, I like, it's colorful and very dynamic in its way. And that sort of speaks to me. So I invite you to explore, do the same yourself. If you look at the movies, and you can look at them either as Four Horsemen, there's two movies about that. And it's worth reading about if you can see them. I've never seen the 1921 version. I have seen the 1962 version. I don't remember much about it. I think I remember a couple of scenes though, and why do I remember them? I don't know. In both cases, you've got a family that's torn apart by the chaos that's unfolding around them, and that's going to reflect itself in the family being full of chaos too. In the 1921 version, it's this Argentinian family, and I think they're living in Paris, and it's how World War I affects them. In the 1962 version, again, it's an Argentinian family living in Paris and how World War II affects them. So you've got some of that same stuff going on. But apocalypse, as we've seen in the other earlier Bible studies and Revelation, means revelation. Has nothing to do with the end of the world. But because the book of Revelation does deal with the end of the world, the word apocalypse and apocalyptic often means in popular culture the end of the world. So look at movies that have apocalypse in their title and what are they saying about the end of the world? What are they depicting? How are they interpreting it? Because that's probably part of the impact of the book on our culture. And then you can do the same thing in music, literature, other art. It's so easy to interpret the Four Horsemen in modern terms today. We look around and we can almost peg each of those four horsemen, and we're going to do that in a minute. But that's not doing justice to John or the book, because it's rooted in the Old Testament. The imagery that John is using is imagery that people who knew the Bible were very familiar with. He's picking one imagery and you go automatically back to Ezekiel or Genesis or Isaiah or Daniel in something. So you have to go back. What did this reference mean in John? What did it mean back in Ezekiel or Amos or Enoch, which is one of the books that people did know in Jesus's day, but it didn't make it into the final version of the Bible, the Jewish Bible or the Protestant Bible. And same with Esdras. So it's worth going through some of those passages. And what I'll show you is John, and that's the next question. John is not just, an ordinary Joe. And suddenly he has this vision and he's writing all these things down. And it's imagery that's just coming at him and he can't interpret it. No, he's not an ordinary Joe. We believe that he was one of the disciples or very close to one of the disciples, very much grounded in his faith and being persecuted for his faith. And he knows, he's been raised with the Jewish Bible, the scriptures. He's so familiar with those images. He sees this vision and automatically he's remembering what Ezekiel or Isaiah or Zechariah said, and he's building it into his writing. It's just so vivid and such a natural progression. So we need to go back to those books and say, how was it interpreted back then? And one of the things you'll see is it didn't always refer to the Roman Empire. Sometimes it referred to the Greek Empire or the Babylonian Empire or the Persian Empire. Sometimes it refers to this. Sometimes it's that. And what it does or can do is reinforce the fluidity of interpretation. That we aren't trying to fix this symbol means that thing, but we allow this sort of back and forth going on. Some people interpret today's events as being the last days because we see signs of the four horsemen. So what's been happening that can lead to such an interpretation, and what is the problem with this interpretation? Well, it's obvious. We're in the middle of a pandemic. What's happened with the pandemic? People have been losing their jobs. There's economic disruption because things aren't getting grown, things aren't getting imported. You've got transportation woes, so prices are going sky high on some items, and yet people can't afford to buy them. So that scale is imbalanced, the pestilence, the plague. So right there, you've got the pale and the black. We've also seen, especially in the United States, but other countries too, in the past few years, this outbreak, this outpouring of hatred for other Americans, whether it's the white supremacists hating anyone who's not white, whether it's the blacks who are so fed up with the whites, whether it's the ultra-right Republicans and the ultra-left Democrats. It's like they no longer see themselves as American. It's we're the right Americans and you're not. That civil war that's just simmering under the surface and has been erupting in the past 4 years. That's the red horse. And of course, you've got the conflicts around the world going on and have been going on. So it is very tempting for many people, maybe you, maybe me, to say, I wonder if these are the last days, because everything seems to be snowballing. But If you know your history, you know this is not the first time such a thing, such a series of events have happened. Go back 100 years. World War One. World War One, international war, international conflict. Sometimes it led to civil wars too. It certainly, World War One triggered or contributed to the fall of Tsarist Russia, the rise of communism, civil war. It triggered some of the war, civil war in Spain. So those are the white and the red horses. Economic collapse. When the war ended, one of the reasons the war ended was the Spanish flu, the pandemic that killed so many people around the world. That led to a very unimbalanced peace and skyrocketing prices, inflation, depression, sort of conflated. It happened in different years in different countries, but there seems to be a correlation. If you go back further, go back to the 1780s, where you had a volcano in Iceland erupting and spewing so much ash in the air, volcanic ash, sulfur dioxide, spread over much of the world, especially Europe, and crops failed for a few years. Crops failed. They couldn't grow. People started starving. In France, they abandoned their farms. They went to Paris begging for food, for help. And, according to tradition, a friend of mine, Marie Antoinette said, let them eat cake. Is that true? Did that happen, or is that an urban myth? We don't know. It's legend or fact. But it highlighted that discrepancy between the rich and the poor, the starving, and that triggered the French Revolution. So climate disaster affecting crops, starvation, leading to pestilence, too, leading to civil war that spread, of course, with Napoleon trying to conquer all of Europe. So those four elements are tied in very much in Napoleon, French Revolution era, 1780 to 1815. You can go back to almost any period in history and you're going to find some of the same things. Go back to the Black Death in Europe and some of those wars that were going on. And again, the economic collapse, as so many people died. And it through the system, the way society worked, it threw it into disarray. So yes, it's happening now, and there seems to be a correlation. Does that mean this is the last days? Probably not, because it's the same thing. It's the same cycle we've been seeing at least for 2,000 years. And you can check religionstolerance.org and look for the acronym TEOTWAWKI. It's the end of the world as we know it. You can also look, was it a year without war, AYWW. And in the past 3,000 years, how many years have there been no wars anywhere in the world? And you realize how precious peace is, that we've been fighting wars and civil wars almost every year since history's been recorded. So that knowledge should make it easier for us to say, yes, I see the similarities, but it may not be the end as we know it. That's all for today, folks. But I do have one more slide to show you, so just a minute. I showed some pictures on this presentation, and I just wanted to identify where I did get them from. The image of the scrolls comes from the Beth Emmanuel Messianic Synagogue, and the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, the 2 pictures. One is from Myths and Folklore Wiki, and one is from Wikipedia. So that's it for the first part of Revelation chapter 6. Thank you. And once again, I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Gaver, and see you next time. Take care, and God bless.